Hey guys, my name is Haley, and we're going to jump into one of my new plans for 2026, and that is to start documenting other media that I consume that is not books, because I know this has been a Booktube channel for years, but I've been trying to get into other media than just books, and I wanted a way to make it feel like it counted on my channel. And I also have been consuming a lot more political content and like exvangelical content and things like that, and I figured this would be a good way to wrap all of those things up. So this might be monthly. I'll probably do one anytime I do a wrap up. I don't necessarily mean that my wrap ups are going to be every month. We're going to shoot for that. That often does not happen for me. So there's my disclaimers out of the way, and I'm going to jump into the other media I consumed. Basically, it's going to be podcasts or video games that I like. I have a few Let's Players. I really only have one Let's Player that I've watched for years. And I'm trying to think of what else. Oh, I went and saw like a musical this month. And like any movies or documentaries that I watch. I also think at the end I'm going to mention any YouTubers or like my favorite YouTubers of the month. And I might split those between Booktube and non-Booktube, because I watch a lot of people on YouTube and I feel like I never get the chance to talk about them. So that's what we're going to expect here. If you enjoy this, if you think this is a fun idea, if you find anything interesting, please leave a comment down below, subscribe. I honestly, if I consume a lot of media, even more so than books, I might do these more often than once a month. We'll see. But I would appreciate it if you would interact with this video to get us out of the algorithm hell that we've been in. But let's jump right on into the video. So the first thing that I ended up listening to / watching, I will give you the disclaimer that 99% of the podcasts that I listen to have a YouTube component to it. So they upload like also a visual video version of their podcast to YouTube. Given the choice, I will almost always watch the YouTube version of it. But you can also go listen to them on like Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. I just prefer to watch them. And most of the podcasts that I follow, I think all but one so far, have a YouTube component. So I also will link as many of these things as I can find below for you to watch if you're interested. That's going to be a lot of work in editing for the description, but I can do that because I know not everybody can like search everything, or it's just more convenient for people. But anyways, the first thing that I listened to was Jubilee's podcast. Jubilee Dawn is I found her on TikTok in like the deconstruction space, because like 90% of my TikTok is deconstruction, which RIP TikTok. As somebody who's most of the people I follow in there were either deconstruction or leftist content creators, and immediately got violations as soon as it sold. I've made it up scrolled. I went back to Blue Sky. Yeah. It's not looking good over there. But anyways, I found Jubilee on TikTok and I knew that she had a podcast. I had not listened to it yet. I'm very much a binge watcher or binge listener when it comes to podcasts or like documentaries and stuff. And she has a podcast called Healed-ish, where she mostly talks to people who are in the deconstruction community and letting them tell their stories of how they were hurt in church spaces. But she also occasionally does other things outside of deconstruction, but I will say most of it is focused on deconstruction content. And the podcast starts out with her story if you don't know it already. So I highly recommend going and checking out her podcast. I binge listened to all like 40 some episodes, and I've really, really enjoyed it. I think it's very important for people who have left and been harmed by church spaces to have places to tell their stories, because in my opinion, as churches like to call them, your testimony, I think that is the most powerful way you can get anybody to relate to you, is telling your own story. And nobody can tell you that your story is wrong. I know people try to on the internet, and deconstruction content in particular gets contested a lot on, especially online, on TikTok, on YouTube. I understand that, but I do think going and listening to people's stories gives people a better perspective on what is going on in a lot of these spaces and how harmful they are overall. But yes, I highly recommend Jubilee's podcast. And then I watched Shiny Happy People Season 1, which is focused on the Duggar family. I watched Shiny Happy People Season 2, which I'm going to bring up later because I rewatched it this year. But I skipped over season 1 and I went and watched season 2 because I knew more of the people in season 2 because I was focused on Teen Mania. So I went back because there was a guest on Jubilee's podcast called Amy Duggar King, which is one of the Duggars, or she is the cousin of the Duggars. And I knew the first season of Shiny Happy People was about the Duggars and the show 19 Kids and Counting. And the Duggars were not something I was ever into. I didn't watch it. I didn't know anything about it when it was on, I think it's TLC or whatever show channel it was on. I had heard of it just because it was such a popular show. I never watched it. I didn't know anybody that watched it, but I know it was very popular in church circles, although I personally never saw anybody talking about it in my circle that I was in. But I ended up watching this to get an idea of what was going on. This season also focuses a lot on Bill Gothard and IBLP, which is something I was vaguely familiar with. Like, that is what the Duggars follow. I was not familiar with the Duggar side of it, but I knew about IBLP and Bill Gothard and like the Institute and everything. And it got dark fast. And I also went on a deep dive on IBLP, which is later on this list as well. But the weirdest part about this part of the documentary for me was the dad, Jim Bob, of the dad of the 19 Kids and Counting. And outside of all of the scandals that happened with the oldest brother, which, trigger warning, there is like many mentions of SA and CPSA in this. So just big trigger warning. If any of those things are triggers of yours, please be careful watching this, because this story was much darker with the Duggar family than I thought that it was. And I'm so happy that Amy has come out, both in Shiny Happy People and being on others' podcasts, to tell her story of how she was involved in this family and what they did to her reputation, calling her like the crazy cousin, even though she was just not as strict because she didn't fully follow IBLP and their rules and everything. But the weirdest part about this to me was the dad, Jim Bob, who, as somebody who was in as somebody who was in Christian spaces for almost 10 years, that I was in those churches and going to events, watching some of the way people present themselves, whether it's from IBLP, whether it's from the Institute, whether it was just Jim Bob in front of his family and on camera, was really, really eerie to me, because I knew a lot of pastors who presented themselves as this very friendly, very charismatic, like even like body mannerisms type way. That was like very eerie, because I knew people personally who acted exactly the same way that Jim Bob does. It was really scary for me. Or even like, what's his wife's name, Michelle, or even the kids, of why the kids aren't rowdy. And it's because the whole idea of IBLP is to break the spirit of a child, which as a teacher makes me want to rip my hair out. But yeah, this was a very hard watch for me, but I'm glad that I went back and watched it, because it does show a lot of the darker side of evangelical spaces. And then I went back and rewatched Shiny Happy People season 2, which I had watched last summer, I believe, while we were living in Vegas. And I did it to show it to my partner, to give him an idea of, these are the type of spaces that influenced my church culture. So like Teen Mania was this, they did these huge youth events with like pyrotechnics and fireworks and like really dynamic like rock concert worship sets. That's what I came from. That's what every youth event I ever went to looked like. And I can tell that they pulled absolutely from Teen Mania, and Teen Mania and Ron Luce very much inspired most of evangelical culture today, even though Teen Mania itself closed and Ron like fled the country. It's very, very eerie seeing how much of that is still present and has been built upon in the years following all of that, and how much of those spaces I personally was in. I did not realize the emotional manipulation in all of those situations. Just literally a lot of the worship music in general is very emotionally manipulative, which is a whole story I can get in some other deep dive as I talk more about deconstruction content. But yeah, I showed this to my partner because I think it's a good way of explaining the type of spaces that I was in. Even though I wasn't ever a part of Teen Mania, because Teen Mania was pretty much gone by the time I joined church spaces. the influence was definitely there in all the spaces that I was in, especially the worship. It was very, very, or the way that they preach, of the yelling, like passionate yelling preaching. That's what every Pentecostal pastor that I met with or saw in the UPCI sounded like. And it's really, really triggering for me to listen to sometimes. So I like to show it to people to give them an idea of what I'm talking about when I say these are the spaces I came from. This is why I have issues. Then I did a complete 180 and I follow Miss Redacted, who is a teacher. She talks about teaching content and everything on TikTok as well as YouTube as well as Instagram. And she does these like weekly deep dives on a topic of whatever she's interested in that week. And one of them that she did recently was on sharks. And as somebody who grew up on Animal Planet, I had the time of my life listening to this like hour and a half long just stream of her teaching us about sharks with a bunch of footage. It felt like I was watching the Animal Planet, and I low key missed that. I don't even know if Animal Planet still exists, like either on a streaming service or on like cable or anything. Not that I've had cable in years, but it was very nostalgic for me. I also love Miss Redacted and everything that she does, and I'm really sad I didn't get to see her on tour because she came to my city. But yeah, if you want just like a random deep dive topic from a teacher who's like actually used to building lessons and stuff, I highly recommend her. And then when it comes to Let's Plays, I mostly only watch John Wolfe. I've been watching him for probably close to 8 to 10 years, somewhere in there. I found him through this random game called, I think it's called Maze, like Maize, like corn. And it's like this weird horror game. And I found him also through his Five Nights at Freddy's plays, which is how I think his channel blew up originally. And I've been watching him. He's the only Let's Player I like because he doesn't fucking scream at the camera. Like most Let's Players do. Like I can't do a Markiplier. I can't do like Jack, what's his name? Jacksepticeye. I can't do any of them. And I'm only really ever interested in puzzle and horror games, and that's pretty much most of what John plays. And he did a series this past year called The Blueprints, which is this like weird logic puzzle game that gets so in depth and it's so well thought out, and it's an indie game. It won like one of the indie game of the year things at the indie awards, and I binge watched the hell out of this. I think I watched the first like 20 parts in a very short period of time. Like I sat for days and just watched these like 2 to 3 hour videos a piece of like 20 some videos, and I just finished it literally right before filming because I was putting off the last like two videos because they're long, they're like 3 hour videos, and I didn't want it to be over. But if you like puzzle games, if you like really snarky, sassy people who play horror and puzzle games but don't scream at you into the camera, I highly recommend John's channel. I will probably regularly bring him up in these because I kind of just hoard a lot of his videos because they tend to be like 2 to 3 hours long, and then I will just binge watch them at certain times when I feel like I need like a video game fix, because I personally am not great at playing them. I grew up playing like Nintendo 64 games, and once we like got past that, video games were not for me. So I do like to vicariously watch Let's Plays, but really only his, because he also plays the games that I'm interested in. So yeah, it's John Wolfe. Oh, I will also say about Blueprints, I've never in my life downloaded the soundtrack to a video game until Blueprints. It is a beautiful soundtrack, and I downloaded it to my Apple Music because I was like, it's stuck in my head after watching probably hundreds of hours of gaming footage of it. It's a great, great soundtrack. Highly recommend. And then another podcast that I listen to that I've been listening to for years, I even give to her their Patreon. I've been catching up on Madeline Pendleton's podcast, which is called Pick Me Up, I'm Scared. If you don't know who Madeline is, she's somebody on TikTok who's very famous. She talks about socialism and things like that, and breaks down the ideas behind it in very small snippets. She also has gone through many a smear campaign of people trying to like make shit up about her. And as somebody who's followed her for 3+ years, I can tell when people are just bullshitting. So that out of the way, if you've heard that name, that's probably why. But she has a podcast where she does deep dives with one of her friends, David, and they do like literally neurodivergent deep dives on topics. And the ones that I listened to this last month, they're also really long. They're like 3 hour long episodes a lot of the time. And the ones that I listened to recently, where I listened to the politics of horror, which included like bad representation about disabilities and racism. That was I think multi-part, like 2 or 3 part episode that I listened to, which is a subject I find really interesting. I will even listen to her podcast in general when there's subjects that I wouldn't normally look up myself, because a lot of it's also political. Like, we dove into the Irish potato famine, we dove into the LA fires from last year, and I just recently listened to the Haitian Revolution. And I think right now I'm on the USAID episodes of what they do around the globe, and like there's also a lot of deep dives on what the CIA is up to, because that's a hyperfixation of Madeline's. But I highly recommend their podcast. It's very interesting. I will listen to anything that Madeline makes, so I'm probably slightly biased, but if you want like a neurodivergent deep dive, like hyperfixation on certain subjects that are long episodes, if that's your thing in podcasts, I highly recommend theirs. And then last weekend, I went and saw Rent at my favorite theater. This is a theater that I did a lot of shows at as a teenager in like early 20s before I joined the church cult. And I have a lot of friends that I still talk to from that area who do shows there. And a friend of mine, who was a very close friend of mine when I was doing shows, was going to be playing Roger in Rent, which Rent is my favorite musical of all time. It has been since I was 11 years old. Did I listen to La Vie Boheme as an 11-year-old and knew every word to it, even though I didn't know what half of them meant? Yes. Yes, I did. Hello, my name is Haley. I can sing La Vie Boheme and that entire show word for word, no problem. It's like trapped in my brain. And I knew I had to go see my favorite show. Roger was a dream role of my friend Adam's, and another close friend of mine was directing it at my favorite place. And so me and my partner went and saw it. We stayed down in Ohio for about a day and a half, saw the show. It was incredible. We avoided a lot of the snow coming back up here because it was like the week of that winter storm that just came through half of the country. And not only did Adam fucking knock it out of the park, as I knew he would, there were a lot of other people who I don't think I've ever seen in shows there, and I see a lot of shows regularly at Weathervane, who came from all over coming to see Rent, who like lived all over, that don't normally do shows at Weathervane. And I personally think that's because Rent is so many people's favorite show, and it's such an important show to have happening in the current political climate of the United States, because it is a very, very queer show. It talks about a lot of queer topics. It talks about homelessness. It talks about how are people going to pay rent. Like, literally the subject of the storyline is nobody has money for shit. And that is also the main storyline of a lot of our characters in this, outside of all of the romance aspects of it. There's a trans main character, or a drag queen. It is set in the 90s, so like the terminology is not quite what it would be today, but it also talks about the AIDS epidemic. Also, my friend who does the costuming at Weathervane did so well with so many of the costumes. I remember a friend of mine, or one of the characters who runs the life support group in Rent, if you're familiar with the show, and he had on the pink triangle that the Nazis used for queer people, and like reclaiming it says silence equals death. And I literally cried just seeing some of the costumes that were not like technically traditional costumes for Rent. They also had like protesters and stuff in the show, which I thought was a great addition. And it made me very emotional. I cried like half the show. I already cry every time I see that show, but seeing my friends in it and seeing the little changes and tweaks they did to it was A plus. I loved it. I can't say enough about that theater. If you are in the Akron area, please check out Weathervane, no matter what show they're doing. I think the next one they're doing is Shrek, which I'm going to also try to go down and see, because I love Shrek. I love seeing the musical, like the stage musical. It's so fun. But yes, if you're in the Akron area of Ohio or within driving distance, highly recommend checking out their shows and their seasons. If anything sparks your interest, please go check them out. They're a very small theater, but they do have like a lot of like wealthy donors that have been there for like half of their life and stuff. So anything to support live theater, especially queer theater at this time in our current political climate, is very, very needed and very, very necessary. And then last of the content that I consumed was Cults to Consciousness, which is a channel I've found and like dabbled at looking at a lot of their stuff. They also do a podcast format. They also do like anybody who's in some form of cult, but a lot of the cults end up being religious in nature of the people that come on and tell their stories. And Shalise, who is the person who does most of the interviewing, is ex-Mormon, so she also will occasionally insert some of her things. There are a few interviews on there of her telling her story. But because Shalise has so many episodes on her channel, I try to like go through like bouts of like subjects that she's covered. Like I know there's like yoga cults that she's covered, there's IBLP people, there's shiny happy people, like people who were involved in the shiny happy people, either IBLP or Team Mania, that she's interviewed most of the people from that documentary. So that's a great place to start if you've seen the documentaries. But I went on a deep dive of IBLP after watching all of the Duggar stuff, and Bill Gothard and IBLP, and people who were essentially abused by Bill Gothard, and the tactics that the Institute, I think it's ATI is the name of their institute, implemented and pushed out to families as ways to live a godly life. Which makes me cringe even saying. But yes, Bill Gothard did get accused. I think the statute of limitations was up on a lot of him, so I don't think he was ever actually imprisoned. I also found out he lives outside of Chicago, which is like the weirdest place for that man to live, because Illinois is not a very conservative area, and bleh. But he's also an old man who made all of these basic life principles and like ways to live a godly life and ways to live and have a happy marriage and how to discipline your children. And this man was never married, and he also preyed on younger women, particularly underaged women, who came to his institute and like helped him out and like were his assistants and stuff. And so I went through a lot of their stories of people who had come on to Calls to Consciousness for Shalice's podcast. And they're horrifying. So trigger warning for essay in general, but the subject that I delved into of her podcast recently was anything to do with IBLP or shiny happy people. So if you have religious trauma and you are looking to hear other people's stories, I do recommend checking it out. But please, if you have certain triggers, Shalise does a pretty good job of giving a trigger warning of what is going to be in the episode. So please be cautious going into them. But again, I think hearing people's stories is how we bring things like this down. Like that ended up happening with Teen Mania, was people sharing their stories. And that's how Ron Luce's entire system got shut down and he was forced to flee the country. That ended up happening with, I think, with Bill Gothard. I don't think IBLP or ATI, or I think those still exist and are still a thing, but Bill Gothard was taken out. Like he was kicked out of his own institute because of the allegations against him. Even though he wasn't in prison, there was a consequence, which is better than what's going on in a lot of political things in the country right now. But yeah, a lot of spiritual trauma things are what I watch, which is going to probably be a regular thing in my time. I didn't really watch any movies this month. I'm hoping to get to more of those. I did make a list of movies I want to get to. So we'll see how that goes in the coming months. But at the end of this, I really just wanted to shout out a few YouTubers. I already talked about Calls to Consciousness, so we're not going to mention her. Let's do booktubers. I've really liked McKenna Loves Content. If you don't follow her, I highly recommend. I think she's still under 10K. But she also is doing a lot of what I kind of want to do. She does like recommendations of movies, she does recommendations of books, she does like reading vlogs. She does very similar content to me, so I've been really enjoying her content in general. Another favorite this month has been Kitty from Spicy Cats Reads. She's probably one of my favorite like booktubers in the bookish space right now, because she also implements a lot of other things in her content other than just books. And she just recently traveled to Mexico, and I really liked her Mexico vlogs. She also will occasionally talk about the horrors of the United States and the politics of it all, and how we live in hell right now, which is very relatable to me, because I feel crazy watching content that doesn't mention at all what's going on right now in America. And I recognize that a lot of people use their content as to be like, oh, we're a safe space where we can get away from the world. And I'm like, I understand that. Even a mention is better than nothing, because the silence really makes me feel like I'm living in a fucking Twilight Zone. as if the world isn't falling apart around us. So, and then another person I follow is Heather McGlary. She has blown up over the last few years. I followed her like right after she stopped van lifing, and I've been really, really enjoying her vlogs. She has very, very calm, cozy, relaxing reading vlogs. I'm also really looking forward to the fact that she keeps mentioning that she's planning to move in the next few months, which I think I love moving vlogs, and I also love reading vlogs. So I've been really enjoying her channel as well. And then some more random YouTubers. If you want political content, Happy Pancake has been one of my favorite content creators. I love her sass. I love all of her graphics. I love the topics that she covers are usually political in nature and what's going on in the current regime in charge of the United States. So I highly recommend her channel. And then other political wise, Monty Mater has forever remained probably my favorite content creator right now. She basically does like 3 minute and under, but also she does some longer content of breakdowns of the theology and the biblical nature of a lot of the things that people in Trump's regime try to use scripture to explain why they're doing things and why they won't do this and why they won't do that. And she just breaks it down and tells them how they're wrong. And the sassiest, angriest, like righteous rage is my best way to explain her. And her videos are so satisfying to me. I love to send her videos to people who want to argue about certain topics of just like, here's the actual facts of what's going on. Enjoy. I love her. And then two other random, I've followed Dan and Phil forever. And when they came out, like I think it was in 2020 when they both came out separately, and then recently last year, I think it was only a few months ago, it feels like forever, they came out as a couple, which most of us like suspected, but they also had a lot to work through personally, and they decided to come out publicly with that. But they also created a podcast when they came out publicly. It's called The Hard Lunch, and I find them so funny. I've been watching them since I was like a teenager, and I love their podcast so much. It's like ADHD and a podcast. That's the best way to describe their content. If you don't know who Dan and Phil are, this probably doesn't interest you. If you don't know who they are, you're probably not going to get into them now, but I love their podcast. And it's a very crazy, fun, like, escape from reality. And also, the way they think makes a lot of sense to my brain. So yes, I've been loving their podcast. And then also, I really love Sai's channel. I think she just recently changed her channel name, but she's Sai Loves Frogs on TikTok. And she has like a vlog daily life channel of her and her partner. I love her vlogs. They're some of my favorite vlogs on the internet. Very cozy, very cutesy, very just, I don't know. I enjoy it. Her partner has just currently had top surgery, and she's been taking care of them, and I love them and their little life so much, and I would love to be friends with them. So I love watching their channel. But yes, those are all of the YouTubers I've been enjoying. Let me know in the comments down below if you have not mentioned anything yet. Let me know who your favorite YouTuber to watch is in the comments down below. But thank you all for watching, and I will see all of you guys next time.